So we have another new laptop in the shop. Now that Dell has done end of life on the 6530 series, this is the 6540 series. Not a whole lot of differences from the previous generations, mainly just a few styling cues. The major one is the matte aluminum shell, whereas the previous one had the darker gunmetal gray color. You still retain some of the gunmetal gray color back here. You've still got your power, hard drive, and battery light up here. As far as ports go on the 6540, left hand side you have USB 3, HDMI, your Kensington lock, your CPU exhaust fan. These can be ordered with express cards. I did not order that with this one. On the back you have your power in the corner still, standard 19.5 volt Dell charger, VGA, Ethernet, another USB 3. On the right hand side you have microphone, two more USB 3.0s, your wireless switch, and your DVD tray and or secondary hard drive. You'll notice that this series doesn't have the mini FireWire port on it that the previous generations did. I don't know how many people use mini FireWire ports. Internally, keyboard wise is pretty much the same as previous generations. They went to a single hook here instead of dual. Kind of makes the lid bounce up and down a little more than the 6520s and 30s, but it's no really big deal. The power button's designed a little different. It's a little more stylish. Your volume and mute buttons are up here. The keyboard layout is pretty much exactly the same. Your middle mouse button here with your pointing stick is a little skinnier than the previous generations, but the keyboard, I don't have any finger here. The keyboard bezel comes off the same exact way as the previous generations. It just pops off, and obviously you've got your bottom screws and your top screws to remove keyboard. On the bottom side, you've got your speakers in the front. You've got your your SD card slot in the front as well. The big difference is the bottom cover. Before, the cover on the previous series went all the way to the back. They've now sectioned it off, so you actually have to take the battery out to pull the cover off, because there's little tabs on each end that you need to pull off. Another big difference is you only are required to remove 3 screws to actually remove this cover. The 6530 was 4 screws, and the 6520 was 8 screws. And I found that if you just come to the corners here and pry up on here, you can pop it off. And it just kind of comes off this way like the previous generations. Here's your undercarriage. This one was ordered with the ATI graphics, as at the time that was the only available option. The Intel HD 4600 series integrated graphics is also available. Here's your CPU fan, your heat piping that's now all painted black compared to other models where you'd have black over here and copper over here. Probably more aesthetics. Here's your wireless card, another half mini slot, and a WAN slot that also will work with mini SSD cards. I have verified with a 60 gig Kingston SSD that the BIOS does recognize it as a secondary hard drive, and you can even boot off of it as well. Previous 6530 and 6520 series would not recognize SSDs in that card slot. The hard drive on this is a 256 gig SSD. It's actually a mini PCI card and an adapter. They didn't specify when you ordered it, just said 256 gig SSD. Fits very tight in here. Has your little rubber bumpers on it. It has an adapter. Other than that, it's just this is a light-on SSD. up to 16 gigs of RAM is available from Dell. I do believe this should support upwards and over 32 gigs. This does use the low voltage DDR3, which is 1.35 volts over 1.5. Other than that, everything is pretty much still standard. Here's the lock that you lock the CD-ROM drive in place. The bezel is a little, kind of seems to interfere with the edge of this laptop. Not really a big deal. The battery on the 6540 is a standard 65 watt hour lithium battery, whereas the previous generations was 60. As far as weights and dimensions go, the previous generation E6520s and 30s, this is a 6520, they clocked in at approximately 6 pounds, 5.6 ounces. The 6540 is only 5 pounds, 12.5 ounces. So, about a half a pound lighter, which can make a difference if you're carrying it all the time. Lengthwise, this previous generations were right at 15 1/8 of an inch wide, whereas now you're right at 14 15/16. The width on the 6520s and 30s is approximately 10 1/8 of an inch, whereas these are 9 7/8. So it's definitely a slightly smaller footprint, which depending on what you're carrying it in may make a difference if you have a bag that's just barely big enough for a 15. This system was ordered with the Core i7 4800 MQ at 2.7 gigahertz. One interesting thing to note is this quad-core processor requires a 130 watt PSU. For size reference, this is a 130 watt PSU. You can run a 90 watt PSU on this, but it will give you a warning on BIOS on boot up that you have inadequate power charging capabilities and your system will run at reduced power and may not charge, blah blah blah. Previous generations you could order the quad core without needing the 130 watt PSU, so that's a change. Like I said, this was ordered with the HD Radeon 8790 card, as at the time there was no option for me to order just the standard standalone 4600 Intel series integrated graphics. Here's your Windows Experience Index score. Your CPU is 7.6, your RAM is 7.8, your graphics is 7, your gaming graphics is 7, and your primary hard disk is 7.9 for a weighted score of 7. So far the warmest part of the keyboard after use is still around the home keys for your hands and the keyboard. It's a little warm down here, but generally just straight across the middle. The trackpad really isn't hot. SSD probably helps with that. Overall, this will be a nice replacement for the 6530 since end of life. Thanks for watching.